So I am still in the checking and testing phase of this Holden 308 rebuild, and the step I'm up to is checking valve lash. I've already started. I checked the lash on the valves for cylinder 1, and what I found was I could hardly get any lash at all. In other words, all the free play in the push rod was taken up simply by tightening the rocker down onto the post. The exhaust was okay, but because of that variation, it's got me concerned about whether the shims that I'm using under the rockers are going to be enough, or whether I'm going to have to go to a shorter push rod just so I can maintain a really good rocker geometry. So what I'm going to do is check every valve on one head and see if that variation is still there, or if it's just that intake on cylinder 1 that's the problem, and that'll help me decide whether I go with the shims or whether I need to find some shorter push rods. So these are the original rockers that came with the heads. They're from Yellow Terror. And each of these rockers had a shim pressed into them, which shouldn't have been done that way. These should have just sat right on top of the rocker post, like so. But where they were pressed in was into that, oh, hang on, let me show an empty one, into that flat area there on the trunnion. Anyway, I've pulled them all out, as you can see, and I have bought some fresh high tensile steel washers that will be the new shims, if shims work though. Now, I vaguely remember when I pulled the engine apart, which was so long ago now, I've forgotten exactly what happened, but I'm pretty sure there was one extra shim somewhere under one of these rockers, and I think that could be a hint as to why I'm getting no lash on the intake on cylinder 1 with just one of these new shims. So I'm really not sure whether shims are going to be enough or whether I'm going to have to go with a shorter push rod, but what I'm going to do now is install valves on this entire head and check lash right across the board and see if I'm getting the same variation problem as I'm getting on the first cylinder, or whether I can get away with the shims and really just try to double shim the intake on cylinder 1. So I did go and buy some very light test springs. I've got 4 pairs, so 8 of them for one head. They're not too expensive, but I think this is a good investment in just being confident that the valve train's going to work properly. Obviously these are from Comp Cams. I think a few different companies make them, but that's all I could get that was available. And I also bought an adjustable push rod so I can find out whether a shorter push rod is really going to make the difference or not. This one is 8.5 to 9.8 inch push rod. That was the closest I could find that would kind of line up with a standard 308 Holden push rod length, which I think is something like 8.686 inches. So step 1 is I'll get the valves installed on this head. That little bit of rubber is just to hold those valves up while I put the springs on. Everything's going to get cleaned before final assembly, so I'm not being too fussy about this. I don't know if I'll need that magnet, but it's there just in case. There we go. That's fiddly. So I am using my new valves. I'm using the new sets of retainers and locks or collets. And even though my hands are not very strong, I think once I kind of figure out a bit of a technique, getting these test springs in is really not that hard. Now, can I get this onto the block by myself? It's a heavy cast iron head. I have taken this head off and put it back on countless times now in this testing and checking phase for the cam degreeing and also for the piston valve clearance checking. Now for valve lash checking, so this head gasket that I have on here was brand new. I'm not going to reuse it. I'm going to get another one for final assembly for sure. I am not torquing these head bolts in, I'm just nipping them up really, and I'm an easing 4. I don't imagine that that's going to make any difference to the check I'm doing. I'm not sure how much this is going to matter, but these are the new hydraulic lifters. They're obviously not pumped up, so the plunges are going to move a little bit. But when I'm checking the lash, that's exactly what one of the things I'm looking for, is to see whether, as I tighten the rocker down, is the push rod already starting to push down into the lifter. But I'm going to give them a bit of a clean with brake clean, probably. Also just put a bit of engine oil in there and some assembly lube from the cam pack that I have just on the base of the lifters. So the cam, if it's not already obvious, is already in the block, and I'm hoping that that's going to stay there and not have to come out again. And this is just leftover assembly lube for the cam. It's probably not going to matter too much for what I'm doing, but what I have been doing since I started all this testing is where a rocker went, the rocker always goes back to the same place. Where a lifter went, the lifter always goes back to the same place. Head bolts even though I'm not even torquing them down, head bolts are just coming into and out of the same place. I don't know that it matters, but I think it's probably not a bad habit to get into. And that's what this valve tray helps me do. So all the lifters on that bank are in. I've just got the push rods for cylinder 1 in. The lifters are currently on the base circle of the cam for cylinder 1, so this is ready for checking lash. And I'll be checking rocker geometry at the same time, just making sure that the roller on the rocker is kind of striking and staying pretty much in the middle third of the end of the valve stem. If it's not doing that, then I'll have to figure out what I've got to do to correct it, because that's really how it should travel. It shouldn't be getting too close to either edge of the valve stems. In case you're new to the channel, that Tirana is not the destination for this 308. This 308 is going into my HZ1 tonner. That's Scotty's Tirana, and he's putting an LS in that. I am going to install these rockers with the shims that I bought. They're just going to sit on the rocker posts. I'll need them. Now these adjusters, that's loose. These adjusters are backed all the way out. There's no preload. No preload should be applied when I tighten these rockers down. So I haven't even taken up all the slack yet. The rockers are still quite loose, because I want to watch what happens with the lifters and with the free play in the push rod when I do start tightening this down, because this is really simulating the problem that I'm having, this one being cylinder 1. That's just taken it up there. And that's just taken it up there. I can feel virtually no free play in that push rod. That's the intake on cylinder 1. But you can tell there's still... Have I got that not tightened down? There's still plenty of free play on that side, but there... Oh, maybe it's marginal, but really there's not much at all. Now if I tighten these right down, I'll lose all of the free play in that push rod. Not leaning on it, just giving it a bit of a push. You can see in here I've still got free play there, but nothing there at all. If that pattern repeats itself across this head, then I know I've got a bigger problem than shims can solve, and I'll probably need to go with shorter push rods. But if it is just an anomaly with this first rocker, the rocker post, the valve, who knows what, if it's just that, then maybe I can get away with just putting an extra shim under this one and letting everything else just have its single shim. So I'll get the rest of this assembled and ready, and then go cylinder by cylinder and do the same check that I just did on the first one. So again, I'm just, these are new push rods, so I'm just giving them, I've given them a bit of a clean with brake clean and a little bit of engine oil on them. I'm pretty sure these are just a tiny bit longer than a standard Holden push rod. These are 8.7 inches, and the standard Holden was, what did I say, 8.686 or something like that, so it's pretty close, but maybe that's just enough to make a difference, who knows. So these aren't anything special. I'm calling them shims, but they're just high tensile steel washers. I don't remember how thick they are. I'll put that down there once I go and find out. These are the original rockers, and they're a little bit disgusting, so I think I'll spend a few minutes just cleaning them up before I put them on. I've really only given these an 80% clean, but it's better than they were. and just a little bit of engine oil on the rollers. And I've just looked at a replay of a previous part of the footage for this video and noticed that I have my stupid blue chemist reading glasses on. Too bad. I need to be able to see what I'm doing. No time for vanity. Of course, these rockers are going to get a much deeper clean before final assembly. I'm not sure if these spacers come in different lengths either. That could be another option, I guess, if the shims aren't quite long enough. But again, this is all contingent on whether with the shims I can still get a good movement of the rocker roller across the tip of the valve stem. So I'm going to get the lifters of cylinder 3 down on the base circle of the cam, and then I will start playing around with checking the how much free play I've got and lash I can get on cylinder 3. So I'll make sure the adjusters are all the way out. And they are. And that's just so no preload gets applied simply by tightening the rockers down onto the posts. Now I'm just going to take it just 2, which is there. Just there. I've still got free play in both those push rods. So now I'm going to tighten the rockers down so that they're not torqued down, but just firm. Which is probably only an 1/8 of a turn of push, maybe a little bit more. That's a little bit tight on that. That's definitely out. Let's do 5. Virtually no free play on either of them. Wouldn't you think there'd be a fair amount, like a really noticeable amount, with the adjusters backed all the way out? Like that one. Well, that's not going to, and that's not going to, because those lifters are up. This lifter is still quite down. Just there. There's a good, not a bad amount. If I just tighten it up a little bit more. That's okay. I'd say they're pretty tight, they're okay, they're pretty tight, and these are, that one's okay, but this one feels a little bit tight. So there. The easiest solution would have been if it had just been that one valve. But I think there's more than I want that's tight. So I ended up having a chat with my Holden mentor, Gary, about how much free play I'm getting and not getting. And it seems like what I'm getting on this cylinder 7 is actually enough to set the lash properly. Part of the issue being that the adjusters really need to turn, they need to do some work, they need to be actually in their, as Gary puts it, their working range. Whereas with the intake on cylinder 1, there just was no movement at all in the push rod, so the adjuster's not doing anything. And maybe moving it half a thread down, that's when it's sort of taking up the preload, and that's not really enough movement for the adjuster. So I think I've got a little bit more measuring to do. I want to make sure that the top of the valve stems is all even. So in other words, that the valves are all pretty much the same height. I've already put a straight edge across the rocker posts, and I could not see any variation in their height at all. So I don't think that's part of the variation. Maybe the steel washers I bought are maybe not a very high quality item, and therefore maybe they are not a consistent thickness. So I have to get the digital calipers over here to check them. So next step is to take these off again, put a straight edge across the valve stems, and also measure the variation in the washer shims that I'm using. But I am learning this. I'm on a learning curve. So there may be stuff that I haven't thought of. There may be stuff I failed to tell Gary about, so he doesn't know to give me feedback about it. If you've got any thoughts or suggestions about what could be causing the variation in free play across one head, share it in the comments. Might give me some more clues about which way to go to get this rocker geometry working well. I'm also curious about why all of this discrepancy is happening. So I've got a straight edge across the valve stems now. And for the most part, it's touching all of them along here. But then I see a tiny little gap above the exhaust valve on cylinder 1, and then it's touching on the intake. So I don't know that there's probably a little bit of movement. Nah, not much at all really. So I don't think the variation in valve stem height is the cause for the amount of variation in the pushrod free play. I guess this is the fun with old engines, isn't it? This one's certainly being a lot of fun. What with the cam degreeing variation, now the valve train. I wonder what's going to happen when we start looking at the crank. It's been a week, but I'm back with the 308. I took those washers home and measured them with the digital calipers just to see how thick they were. The thickness that I got was between 80 and 85 thou, so there's a fair bit of variation in the washer thickness, but also these washers are twice the thickness of the Yellowterra rocker shims that are available, which I think are 47 thou each. So because 80 to 85 thou is not working under these rockers, I would need at least 2 of the shims from Yellowterra, and I really don't like the idea of stacking shims under these rockers. So I got out the adjustable pushrod and fiddled around with it back on cylinder 1 under the intake rocker, and kind of worked out where I could get a reasonable amount of free play there. And yeah, the reason why I'm focusing on this one is this was the tightest. So if I get a good amount of free play here, then the rest will have enough free play, and therefore that tells me what length pushrod is going to work. The next step though is to make sure that with that pushrod length, which is a fair bit shorter actually, how does the roller under the rocker move across the end of the valve stem? I think what I am aiming for is for the roller to move across maybe the middle half to 2/3 of the end of the valve stem. I don't want the roller going anywhere near the edge of the valve stem. I don't really have a way to measure the length of this adjustable pushrod to the length that worked with that valve, so I'm kind of bodging something up here with a ruler. And the way I see it, I think I get about 217 millimeters. I don't think you're going to see it with the reflections going on here. But regardless, that's quite a bit shorter than the push rods that came with my cam kit, which is, these are 8.7 inches, which is pretty close to a standard pushrod length for a Holden 308, which is 8.676 or something like that. But yeah, you can see there's definitely a difference in the length of them. I've tightened the rockers down onto the posts, and obviously that one doesn't matter for the adjuster because there's no pushrod in there. That's the adjustable pushrod here. I just took up the slack so there wasn't any free play, and then turned the adjuster a half a turn more, and I've just sort of pulled that lock nut down a little bit. So now let's see how the rocker roller moves across that valve stem. Well, I don't know if you can see it, but what I'm seeing is the roller contacting the end of the valve stem, but only using the inner half of the valve stem back. And when I say inner, I mean the half of the valve stem that's closer to the rocker rather than closer to the outside of the head. I don't see the roller going anywhere over the half closer to the outside of the head. So the plot thickens. It's a bit of a bugger. I don't like the way the rocker's roller is moving across the end of that valve stem. And I also don't want to be stacking shims onto the rockers either. The shorter pushrod isn't so much a problem, I don't think. I can find a shorter pushrod. I can get an 8.5 inch, 8.5 inch pushrod, 5/16 diameter like the standard Holden one is, but it's for a Ford Cleveland, and I don't know if there's some other dimension about a pushrod that would mean that those would not work in a Holden. What I'm going to do is get my engine mentor Gary to come out and just go through it again with me in case I've done something silly, or in case there is another combination that's going to work better, or if indeed this is the way that I'm going to have to proceed. So there is still some more work to get this valve train to a point where I feel confident with it. And then hopefully by the time there's another video about this 308, all of that will be sorted and we will be moving on to checking clearance for main bearings and rod bearings. See you then.